first suit showed up in 1938 in Action Comics #1, and here's what's wild about it. Before that suit existed, superheroes basically didn't exist. There was no template, no rulebook. No one had done this before and left a map for anyone else to follow. The people who designed it, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, were just two young guys trying to make a character on a cheap comic book page look as powerful and larger than life as possible. So they drew inspiration from circus strongmen and wrestlers, people who were already seen as physical legends in the public eye. These were the strongest, most imposing human figures audiences of that era already recognized. Bright colors were chosen specifically because cheap printing needed strong contrast to survive on newsprint without bleeding into an unreadable mess. And those famous red trunks that people either love or constantly make fun of, they weren't a fashion choice. They were there to visually break up all that solid blue and keep the character from looking like a blurry blob on the page. What came out of all those practical, unglamorous decisions was something nobody expected. A look so iconic that nearly every superhero costume created after it borrowed from the same formula. Bright colors, a chest symbol, a cape that trails behind you. It all started right here in 1938 with a character nobody had ever seen before. And the people who made it weren't trying to create a cultural landmark. They were just trying to sell comic books. Then comes 1978 and Superman makes the jump to live action in a way nobody had ever seriously attempted before. The Christopher Reeve suit had one massive job. It had to make a grown adult in a cape look believable on a cinema screen in front of a real paying audience who had every reason to laugh and didn't. That is an incredibly difficult thing to pull off, and a lot of people underestimate just how easily it could have gone wrong. A slightly different shade, a less confident performance, a shorter cape, and the whole thing collapses into something that feels silly. But the people who made it understood something clever that a lot of filmmakers have gotten wrong since. They went fully comic accurate. No compromises, no dark reimagining, no attempt to explain away the tights or make the whole thing feel more palatable to adult cynicism. Bright red, bright blue, a large S-shield designed to read clearly on camera even from a distance. 47 years later, people still describe that suit when they picture Superman in their heads. That's a legacy that almost no piece of design in any medium can claim. Now we jump to 1993 and everything changes in the most dramatic way possible. Superman gets killed by Doomsday. For the first time in comic history, the symbol of hope was simply gone. Not retired, not missing, dead. And the whole industry felt it in a way that's hard to describe if you weren't reading comics at that time. Other heroes scrambled to fill the void. Storylines tried to address what a world without Superman even looks like. There were 4 different characters stepping up to claim the name, and none of them were really him. And when he eventually came back, he didn't come back in the classic suit. He came back in black. The Black Regeneration suit had a silver S symbol and a completely different energy to it. The long black hair, the darker, heavier tone. The whole look said something that the classic design could never say. This isn't the same Superman you knew. This is someone who went somewhere you don't come back from unchanged. It reflected everything the early 90s were doing in comics at the time, pushing stories into darker, more extreme territory than they'd ever gone before. Grim storylines, brutal fights, permanent consequences. But beyond the era it was made in, the black suit worked because it was honest about something that superhero stories usually avoid. It admitted that resurrection changes you, that coming back from death isn't a clean, cheerful moment where you just pick up where you left off and everything returns to normal. It's heavy. Something is permanently different now. That suit carried that weight visually in a way the bright reds and blues never could, and it left a mark on fans that clearly never faded, because decades later, people were still demanding to see it again. Then DC did something in 1997 that genuinely nobody saw coming. They threw out Superman's powers entirely and turned him into a being made of pure energy. Not a man with extraordinary abilities, actual living electricity that needed a containment suit just to hold itself together in a recognizable human form. The origin of this change came from a storyline where Superman's solar energy was disrupted, fundamentally altering what he was at a physical level. The result was a glowing blue outfit with a white lightning bolt where the S used to be. It looked like nothing that had ever been called Superman before. There was even a period where he split into 2 completely separate beings, a blue Superman and a red Superman, each carrying different aspects of his personality, which created genuinely fascinating story possibilities even if the execution frustrated a lot of readers. Now, depending on who you ask, this era was either bold creative experimentation that deserves respect for its sheer audacity and willingness to break everything, or complete creative chaos that missed the entire point of what makes the character work. Probably a bit of both, if you're being honest with yourself. But what it represents in Superman's broader history is genuinely important. It shows exactly how far publishers will go when a character starts to feel creatively exhausted and commercially stale. When you've run out of new stories to tell with a man who can do everything. Apparently the answer is to take everything away and start again from scratch. It didn't last long. Fans pushed back hard and the classic powers were eventually restored. But it happened, and pretending it didn't would mean missing something real about how publishing pressure and creative desperation actually shaped the characters we think of as permanent and unchangeable. By 2006, Superman had been largely absent from major films for 2 decades, and when he finally came back in Superman Returns, the suit reflected that strange tension between nostalgia and the need to feel feel modern. The colors were darker, more muted versions of the classic red and blue, not the vivid brightness of the Reeve era, but not abandoning those colors either. The chest emblem was smaller and more subtle, sitting on the suit rather than dominating it the way it once did. The fabric had actual texture to it. Thousands of tiny S symbols worked into the material if you looked closely enough, like the suit itself was woven from something meaningful rather than just dyed and stitched. The overall effect was of someone who deeply respected what came before but was trying to quietly update it without drawing attention to the changes. It was clearly trying to honor what came before while carefully modernizing it for a new era of filmmaking. And it's a suit that was never going to fully satisfy anyone, and that's not really a criticism. That's just the honest truth of its position. Too classic for people who wanted something genuinely fresh and unexpected. Too different and too muted for people who wanted exactly what they remembered from sitting in a cinema seat in 1978 feeling like they could actually believe a man was flying. But it tried, genuinely tried, with real care, and you can see that effort in every detail they painstakingly built into it. In 2011, DC scrapped their entire comic universe and rebuilt it from the ground up in what they called the New 52. Everything was rebooted. Every character got a fresh start. Origin stories were rewritten, relationships were reset, and Superman's suit became something fundamentally different from anything that had come before. Kryptonian armor. Not fabric, not a costume stitched together. By a loving mother in a farmhouse in Kansas. Actual alien technology that happened to form into a familiar shape because the person wearing it happened to look human. The red trunks were gone without ceremony or replacement. A high collar came in, giving the design a more imposing, almost regal quality. The material had a metallic, almost biological texture to it, like it had been grown in a Kryptonian laboratory rather than manufactured. The message DC was sending was direct and deliberate. This Superman is not a human hero dressed up in bright colors to make you feel safe. He is an alien. His armor is alien technology from a dead world, and we want you to feel that difference every single time you look at him standing next to ordinary people. A lot of fans genuinely hated it, and said so loudly and repeatedly. But underneath the strong reaction, it was a serious attempt to ask a question that more comfortable versions of the character have always quietly sidestepped. It actually looked like if a being from another world really did show up on Earth, would his clothes look like anything we recognize? Would they look like they belong here at all? 2 years later, in 2013, Man of Steel pushed that same idea even further and committed to it completely in a way the New 52 only partially managed. The suit was covered in intricate Kryptonian patterns, textured and detailed in a way that made it look like it had been grown organically rather than designed or sewn by human hands. The colors were darker and deliberately desaturated, pulling away from the primary brightness of every previous version, and the S symbol was reframed entirely and completely. Not a letter, not a logo, not branding for a superhero franchise. It was the ancient crest of the House of El, a family symbol from a civilization that no longer existed, and it meant hope in Kryptonian long before it meant anything to anyone on Earth. This was a Superman who arrived on this planet not knowing where he truly belonged, carrying a heritage he was still actively learning to understand, trying to figure out in real time whether this world was genuinely his home or simply the place he landed when he had nowhere else to go. The suit reflected all of that internal conflict in every detail. It didn't look like it belonged here. It looked like something from somewhere else, worn by someone still working out his own identity and what he owes to two different worlds simultaneously. It divided audiences sharply, and that debate honestly still runs hot a decade later. But the conflict baked into that reaction was entirely the point of what the film was trying to say. And the suit carried that argument honestly whether you agreed with it or not. Then in 2021, something fans had been loudly demanding for years finally happened. The Snyder Cut of Justice League gave us Superman in black again. He comes back from the dead, and just like in the comics that first told this story back. In 1993, he comes back different. He comes back carrying something. The black suit with the silver emblem reappeared on screen, and it landed with an emotional weight that surprised even people who had spent years campaigning to see it. It became one of the most anticipated costume reveals in modern DC film history, which is genuinely remarkable when you stop and really think about it. A black suit on Superman is on paper just an absence of color, just a different wardrobe choice for a fictional character. But what it carries emotionally by this point is enormous, because the black suit had accumulated decades of meaning. It meant survival against impossible odds. It meant that what came back is stronger than what was lost, and it meant that the person wearing it is no longer pretending the experience of dying didn't change anything about who they are. And now in 2025, the new DCU makes a choice that might seem simple on the surface, but is actually one of the most confident statements any Superman suit has made in a long time. They brought back the red trunks, brighter colors, a more classic overall silhouette, modern fabric textures mixed with the timeless design that started everything back in 1938. 1938. After years of darker takes, more conflicted interpretations, suits that looked alien and heavy and burdened with meaning, the new suit is saying something directly and without a single apology. It's okay for Superman to just be hopeful again. It's okay for the hero to look like a hero without needing to justify that brightness, or dress it down to make it feel acceptable to a more cynical audience. Sometimes the most radical thing a Superman suit can do is simply look like Superman, and that's the pattern. When you lay it all out and look at it honestly from beginning to end, every era gave us a suit that reflected exactly how people felt about heroes at that specific moment in time. A mythic strongman drawn in primary colors because the world needed something larger than life to believe in.